Hi, welcome to Blue Collar Economics. I'm Dr. Brooks Mullen, and today we're going to start off by talking about command systems. Now, we have previously talked about command systems. In brief, a command system is a system of economic coordination whereby a central entity, some form of government, be that a feudal king or a communist Politburo in Russia or the CCP in China, runs the economy, makes all the decisions, answers those 5 fundamental economic questions. And today, we're going to talk about why command systems fail, specifically why they've failed in the past, and why, where we do see some semblance of command systems existing today, they've given over to liberalization and becoming more market-oriented. There are 3 fundamental reasons that command systems fail. We call these the coordination problem, the incentive problem, and the disincentive problem. Now, the incentive problem and the disincentive problem are kind of both sides of one coin, but what we're going to talk about first is the coordination problem. So, the coordination problem works like this. For a command system to be a command system, there has to be a central entity that is making all the resource allocation decisions for the economy, that's answering those 5 fundamental questions of the economy. And when we have that central entity, it creates a problem. And the problem that it creates is that a single entity, whether that's a person or a group of people, does not have the ability to scale with the complexity of the economy. It's a known truth that economies become increasingly more complex over time. Scientific innovation occurs. We have a broad expansion of the types of products that are available, the categories of products that are available. The competition grows amongst similar products. And as a result, we wind up with a large and complex economy that increasingly gets larger and increasingly gets more complex. Now, the problem with that is that the central entity cannot keep up with that increasing complexity. And as a result, that central entity will enforce oversimplification, will strip away the growth of features in order to maintain its ability to have control. It's a known axiom of political power that those that have political power only care about obtaining, maintaining, and growing their political power. And the reality of it is that one person can't keep track of this increasingly complex system. So what does that one person do? They force oversimplification. They force simplicity onto that system. This is going to result in not just forced oversimplification, but forced reduction in variety of available products, and ultimately the strangulation of economic growth in the name of maintaining individual power or political power. And the real problem that we get from this coordination problem works like this. If we put one person in charge of the entire economy, or a cadre of people in charge of the entire economy, what will happen is they will force oversimplification, and it looks something like this. So one day in communist Russia, there's this bolt factory. And this bolt factory makes 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 millimeter bolts. Makes all the bolts that are used in the entire economy, in every kind of manufacturing, in every kind of construction. All the bolts come from this one factory. And one day, a party head is touring the factory and says, well, you know what? I think we're wasting too much time on all of these change-ups and making all of these different bolts. From now on, we only make 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 millimeter bolts. No more odd numbered bolts. No more 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9 millimeter bolts. The party applauds. He reduces the amount of setup time in the factory, so the number of bolts coming out of the factory increases slightly, and he looks good. But now let's think about the rest of that economy. Every single application that required a 1, a 3, a 5, a 7, 9 millimeter bolt now has to be re-engineered. Either has to be completely redesigned and the manufacturing process altered, which is costly and will slow down production and is unlikely to happen, or the more likely solution, they're going to adapt. If they were using a 3 millimeter bolt, now they're going to use a 4 millimeter bolt, and they're going to drill out that bolt hole to make it wider, or they're going to downsize. They're going to use a smaller bolt. But what happens when they do that? Well, if you put a 2 millimeter bolt in a 3 millimeter bolt hole, as that thing moves around, as it oscillates, it's going to result in more pressure on a bolt not meant to hold that weight load, and so it's going to shear the bolt and you'll get a higher rate of failure. Well, okay, let's not go with the smaller bolt. Let's drill every hole out that's a 3 millimeter hole out to make room for a 4 millimeter bolt and use the thicker, stronger 4 millimeter bolt. Now you've got a problem. Around that bolt hole, where you've drilled it out, you've weakened the structure of the metal, again, increasing the failure rates. So let's take a step back and see what happened. One guy decided he wanted one factory to be slightly more productive on paper. And as a result, that has now led to massive systemic engineering failures across every manufacturing center in the economy. This is the problem with centralizing decision making. When you make one entity in charge of all the decisions, one mistake at the top gets magnified out. So you can take this further. We've got a thing called chaos theory. Chaos theory states that as you get a more complex system with more interconnected nodes, a single mistake at one of those nodes is likely to then collapse the entire system. If you tie all those nodes to a single point, one mistake at that point can collapse the entire system very quickly. Not only that, as the economy becomes increasingly complex over time, the odds of that failure occurring approach 1. So it becomes almost certain that the economy will collapse as a result of this one bad decision at the top. And this is, I get it, a little technical, but you have to understand why economists don't believe in strong leaders. We don't believe in the myth of the strong leader. And this applies not just to economic systems, but to governments, to corporations. If you have a business where the guy at the top, the owner, the CEO, what have you, is micromanaging and making all of those decisions, they can't know everything. They can't be experts on everything. So they're either going to enforce simplicity where it's not needed, increasing the likelihood of a mistake, or they're going to not understand what they're doing and they're going to make a mistake. It's why whether we're talking about a CEO, whether we're talking about a communist party, or whether we're talking about the president of the United States, the idea that one person would be involved in making all of these decisions instead of delegating them out to people who know better, who are better equipped to make those decisions, is always a bad idea. So if you learn nothing else today, you've learned that economics says that having a single strong leader is a terrible idea for an organization. Now, the other reason command systems are doomed to fail, besides the coordination problem, come from incentives and the lack of incentives, what we call the disincentive problem. The incentive problem is fairly easy to understand, and you may have heard this argument before. Simply put, in a market system, the more productive someone is, the more value they generate, in theory, in a functioning and competitive market system, the more they would earn. Now, that means that there is an incentive to do better. There is an incentive to innovate. If you come up with a newer, better thing, you get to own that thing. You get to patent it. You get to copyright it. You get to trademark it. You get to trade on it. And you get to earn profit from it. And so there's an incentive for innovation. There's an incentive for hard work. You work more hours. You generate more productivity. You earn more money. Now, the problem with the command system is is that command systems almost universally, historically, don't offer an incentive pay structure like that. Whatever the job is, if you do this job, you get X dollars, and X dollars is fixed. The reality is, in a command system, if you invent something better, the state takes it. You don't experience the gains from inventing that. The state experiences the gains from that creation. And so you don't put in your time. You don't put in your effort because you're not going to gain anything from it. To innovate would create cost without benefit. And so you don't do that. People don't do that. Now, maybe a rare person does, but the vast majority of people don't. As a result, you get slower rates of innovation and slower rates of development. But that's not the only problem here that we get with a lack of incentives. The only way to really improve your quality of life, the only way to do better, the only way to raise your standard of living is through the government. And so what you wind up with is people that want to improve their station in life don't work, they don't innovate, they don't build, they don't create businesses. Instead, they go to work for the government. They try to grow their standard of living by raising their status within the government. So in communist states, you wind up with these incredibly bloated bureaucracies that are unnecessarily large, that employ a substantial portion of the population because those are the only jobs that actually improve your standard of living. And patronage, the ability to award those jobs, is a source of political power. And so you have this power structure that creates jobs in order to facilitate its own power, and it becomes an Ouroboros, a beast eating its own tail. So there is this lack of incentives that drags down command systems, but it's not just the incentives that are the problem. There is what we call the disincentive problem. And the disincentive problem is fairly simple to understand. So the disincentive problem comes from a very simple concept. How does a state have power? A state has power because the state has a monopoly on violence. The state is the only entity that is allowed legally to do violence. Now, this is true regardless of your governmental system. This is true of everything that's not anarchy, where you have a state. The very existence of the state is precipitated on having a monopoly on violence. Now, that comes in the form of pressure. The state uses its monopoly on violence and its threat of violence as a means to coerce behavior. Break the law, we'll put you in jail or execute you or something to that effect. Now, under state communism in Russia more specifically, or the United Soviet Socialist Republic, the USSR, which fell apart in 91, there was a system called the Gulag system. Gulags, if you don't know, the best description of a gulag you'll ever get actually comes from a Tarantino movie. If you ever saw Django Unchained, there is a scene, I'm not going to do it verbatim, I very much don't want to get canceled and YouTube has standards, where the LeQuint Dickey mining company is described to Django by the evil character Steven, played by Samuel L. Jackson. And basically he says, they're going to take you, they're going to make you break big rocks into little rocks until your back gives out, then they're going to hit you in the head with a hammer and they're going to throw you down a hole. And that is essentially what a gulag was. It was a work camp where they sent people to be worked to death under the harshest conditions imaginable. Some of the cruelest things ever done by mankind were done under the gulag system under state communism. Now, it works like this. If you don't do your job, if you don't meet your performance metrics, the threat is that you will go to the gulag. So now we've got this factory. We've got this factory out there in, let's say, Staryovskoye, Russia, in some small town in the Russian hinterland. And at that factory, we all make widgets. Now, the thing is, From the day we're born until the day we die, we know that we have to make quota. If we are sick, we still have to make quota. If we get hurt, we still have to make quota. If we don't make quota, we go to the gulag. If I don't make quota, I go to the gulag. So what happens? From the inception, all of us workers, we work the bare minimum. We need to work so slow and be so underproductive that if we get sick, we can still produce that amount. If we get hurt, we can still produce that amount. If we get pregnant, we can still produce that amount. So, from the very beginning, we underproduce. We are underproductive. Now, let's say along comes somebody from St. Petersburg, gets transferred out to our factory, and this person is a real communist. They believe in communism. They genuinely believe in the idea of communism. They believe in the Soviet system of communism. They believe in it wholeheartedly. And they come to our factory. Now, all of us, we make 10 widgets a day each. This person comes in and they knock out 30 widgets before lunch. They're just giving it their all. Well, you know what happens on lunch break? That guy goes out to lunch break with the rest of us, and one of us comes up to him holding a pipe wrench in our hand and says, look, here's how it works. You make 10 widgets a day and you only make 10 widgets a day. Because if they figure out that we can make more than 10 widgets a day, they're going to send us to the gulag. And if it's me going to the gulag or me beating your skull in with this pipe wrench, I'm going to beat your skull in with this pipe wrench. You understand? Another name for this is tall poppy syndrome. If you stand out above the flowers, you get cut. And so as a result, the fact that the state uses force, uses its monopoly on violence to act as a disincentive against underproduction means, ironically, that it ensures underproduction. So it's not just the incentive problem. It's not just that a communist system, that a command system doesn't motivate people to do better. It actively provides disincentive to do better. It provides incentive to do worse, to be underproductive. So it doesn't incentivize improvement. It actively incentivizes underperformance, and it has no reward structure for improving performance. And even if, beside the point of that, one mistake by leadership results in complete collapse of the system. And for those three reasons, the coordination problem, the incentive problem, and the disincentive problem, command systems always fail, or at least perform suboptimally compared to market systems. Remember, market systems are adaptive. Market systems can become increasingly complex over time, and because they are decentralized, that's not a problem. It's not a bug, it's a feature. Then on top of that, market systems provide active incentive to do better rather than providing both no incentive to do better and active disincentive against performance. So command systems ultimately fail. Feudalism failed. We don't see a lot of feudalism anymore. State communism failed. Now, yes, in China, the CCP still exists, but they have had to liberalize their economy and bring in a lot more features of a market economy in order to obtain successful economic growth and large improvements in the standard of living. And just to kind of bring things back to the world of markets, I'm going to make two quick little notes when we talk about markets. Number one is that markets produce prices. As we'll discuss in future videos, markets produce a point where the quantity supplied and quantity demanded are equal at a single price, what we call an equilibrium price. And that equilibrium price then has a rationing function. Prices tell us what something costs. Now, based on our own personal utility, if my marginal utility is greater than the price, then I buy the thing and I experience additional gains, what we call consumer surplus. If my utility is less than the price, I don't buy the thing. It's overpriced. And so prices have what we call a rationing function. We use prices to guide how we allocate our budget to maximize our utility. So market systems, again, produce prices. Prices provide us this rationing function. And the other thing that we get from market systems, specifically that we get from competitive market systems, and in later videos we'll talk about what that means, but a competitive market system is going to produce efficiency. Now, when we talk about efficiency in economics, understand we are being very specific. There are two kinds of efficiency we concern ourselves with in economics: productive efficiency and allocative efficiency. Productive efficiency is producing at the lowest cost per unit, the least amount of inputs for the given amount of output. And through competition, we get productive efficiency. But we also get what we call allocative efficiency. Now, allocative efficiency is related to productive efficiency. But allocative efficiency is a big picture thing. If all of the parts of the economy are functioning productively, efficiently, we have the most resources freed up to be used in production. There's no excess resource usage anywhere else, which means across the economy, we can allocate resources to the best mix of goods and services that maximizes overall utility in the economy. So productive efficiency is about individually producing at the lowest cost per unit, and allocative efficiency is about allocating resources across the economy to maximize benefit to that economy, to that society. And we get both of those from markets that have healthy levels of competition. Now, when we talk about economic systems, when we talk about these things, what we're ultimately getting at is quality of life. And quality of life is driven by productivity. The more productive the society is, the more productive the average person in the society is, the higher the standard of living. In simple terms, the more productive the members of a society are, the more stuff that society can make, and the more stuff per person you get in that society. Now, stuff per person is not the only metric by which we can measure satisfaction. We'll talk about that when we get to macroeconomics, but it is the best, easiest, ready-to-go-to metric. This usually takes the form of what we call gross domestic product per capita, or GDP per capita. Again, we'll save that for when we get into macroeconomics. Now, as an example of this productivity differences across societies, we can look at average income. Now, again, average income has a lot of problems. It's skewed. It can be heavily tailed into one side or the other. But let's just use it as a proxy for standard of living, for quality of living. The more income you've got, the more you can afford. Generally speaking, the higher your standard of living. So let's talk about a couple of different countries. And the data I've got is from 2011 and 2021. I realize it's 2026, and so the data will have changed since then. But this will give you an idea of how these values changed over time. So the United States, for example, in 2011 had an average household income of $48,000. In 2021, that had increased to over $70,000, something like $70,430 per person. Now, what happened from 2011 to 2021? Well, we got more productive. We had the integration of technology and internet technology into the workplace, which massively increased productivity. One worker could do more work in a given day than they could 10 years previous. Now, compare the United States to Mexico. In 2011, Mexico had an average income of around $9,000. In 2021, it didn't actually go up that much. It only rose to about $9,400. Now, that means that yes, the Mexican people on average did become more productive over that decade, but compare the United States to Mexico. The average American worker is earning substantially more than the average Mexican worker, 5 times more, 7 times more, 10 times more than the average Mexican worker. Why is that? Because the average American worker is more productive. They are capable of producing more. We'll get into this when we talk about labor economics and all the things that can influence labor productivity, but that's the idea. Improving the quality of life comes from improving productivity, which improves income, which improves consumptive capability, which gets you more stuff per person, which is a higher quality of life per person. And finally, let's end today's discussion by talking about economic growth. Specifically, how do we grow output? How do we grow productivity over time? Well, there's 2 ways we can do this. We can accumulate more factors of production, or we can accumulate more technology. Let's start with the factors of production. When we talk about production, there is an equation that we use that is output, Y, GDP, is a function of physical capital K, human capital H, labor L, natural resources N, and then that function is multiplied by A, the level of production technology. Now, again, this is not giving you an actual form of an equation. We're just saying that it is a function of these variables. There are many production functions that have many different combinations of these variables. But as a general idea, output is a function of physical capital, the tools that we actually use in production, the goods that are used to produce other goods and services. Human capital, that is knowledge and skills of your workforce. Labor, the actual amount of labor hours your workforce uses. Natural resources, the raw materials you use in production, and then we'll set technology aside for right now. Now, the thing is, an economy can become more productive if you add more of those 4 things. We accumulate physical capital over time, we get more productive. Now, there is a caveat to that. Capital also decays at a rate. It loses its functionality. It gets worn out over time. So there is a limit to capital accumulation. Then there is human capital, knowledge and skills. Growing the amount of knowledge and skills in your workforce over time makes your workforce more productive and makes your economy more productive. But that does not grow quickly. Getting an education takes years of hard work. Gaining experience doing something takes even more time and effort than getting an education does. And so there's a slow growth to human capital. We talk about labor. Labor comes from how many actual hours you've got people to work. Well, populations grow slowly. In developed economies, without immigration, population growth is actually negative. And so you're not going to accumulate population that quickly. And then we've got natural resources. Now, number one, natural resources are fixed in supply. There's only so much of these natural resources on planet Earth, and we have to find them, we have to extract them, and we have to refine them. All of this takes a substantial amount of time. So long run, the slow growth of these variables provides a backbone for economic growth over time. But the most important factor for economic growth, both in the short run and the long run, is technology. That's why we said that we have GDP as a function of physical capital, human capital, labor, natural resources multiplied by the level of technology. Technology makes all of your other factors of production more productive. It grows the capability of your other factors. And so when we talk about technological innovation, what we really care about is what we call investment-specific technological change. The type of technological innovation that can be invested in to generate increased productivity gains. So while the invention of the microprocessor is innovation, Investment-specific technological innovation is inventing computers to control the processing of machinery, right? So we invent CNC machines, we invent water jets and all of these things to better machine parts using computer controls. That's investment-specific technological innovation. That's what really drives productivity growth. Now, in a previous video, we talked about the idea of what one accountant could do today versus how many people it took to do that same volume of work in the 1960s or 1970s. But I'll leave you with a very simple fact. One farm worker today produces 10 times as much agricultural output as a farm worker did in 1950. Why? Technological innovation. We've got improved physical capital. We've got better tractors and combine harvesters and plows and planting mechanisms. So we have better physical capital to farm with. But it's not just that. We've got better human capital. Our knowledge of farming has gotten better. Our knowledge and capabilities of farming and what works and how to irrigate and how to fertilize have all gotten better. We haven't dramatically changed the amount of labor. In fact, productivity growth has allowed us to dramatically reduce the amount of labor used in farming. And then when it comes to raw materials, we haven't gotten newer land. We haven't gotten better land. Hell, if anything, we've degraded the value of agricultural land substantially. Topic for another video, but soil erosion and soil loss in the United States of America, in the heartland of America, in the old breadbasket, if you will, is a serious problem that will result in major issues down the line if we don't address it today. And then what really made the farmer more productive? What made it so one man on a farm can do the work of 10? Technology. It's not just that we've got bigger, better tractors. Now we've got GPS systems that connect to those tractors so we can plow our fields precisely and control exactly what we're planting. We can control the flow of seeds through our plows using computers. We have a lot more control and a lot more specificity. But it's not just that. We have innovated the plants themselves. We have genetically modified crops. And at the risk of alienating a bunch of hippies, there is no problem with genetically modified crops. In fact, every single thing you eat is a genetically modified crop. You know what corn looked like 10,000 years ago? It looked like little grains that grew on rice stalks in swamps. Humans, through plant husbandry, bred and bred and bred and bred crops to be what they are today. That's how we were able to evolve. That's the agricultural revolution and the beginning of human civilization. A chicken in nature does not look anything like a chicken that we domesticate. All of these things are already genetically modified organisms. The only difference now is rather than breed the whole organism, then crossbreed it with another organism, then crossbreed that offspring and crossbreed that offspring, we can do genetic combinations in laboratories where we just breed cells. So we can do 10,000 generations in a much shorter period of time, allowing us to evolve these things to be different. We evolve chickens to produce more meat, to produce more eggs. We evolve crops to produce higher yields with lower water usage, to be more drought stable. All of these things. But the innovation that we've put into genetically modifying crops has massively increased per acreage yields, allowing one farmer to produce more output. So our technological innovation made our physical capital more productive, made our human capital more productive, made our labor more productive, made our natural resources more productive. Technology is the most important driver of economic growth. If you want to see your society improve its standard of living, ultimately meaning increasing its productivity per person, you need that society to invest heavily in technological innovation. All right, that's going to do it for us for today, guys. This was Blue Collar Economics. I've been Dr. Brooks Mullen. Don't forget to like, to comment, to subscribe. Look for us on the socials. Sooner or later, we're bound to develop those, when we get around to it. But anyway, I'll see you next time.